Welcome to The Explainer. We often think revolutions start with a bang, right? But really, they start with a word. Today, we're diving into the American Revolution's most powerful weapon. And it wasn't a musket. It was its literary arsenal. The speeches, the pamphlets, the poems that armed a whole people with ideas and literally forged a nation. And that idea right there, that's the key to understanding this whole thing. See, before a single shot was ever fired, a different kind of war had to be won. A war of ideas. In all these pamphlets and speeches, the colonists first had to convince themselves and then convince the entire world that what they were doing was right. All right, so let's set the scene. We're going to start in 1775. Picture this. You're in Virginia, and the air is just thick with tension. You've got all these colonial delegates gathered together, and they're facing a choice that could mean, well, peace or a bloody all-out war with the most powerful empire on the planet. So, what was the big question? Should Virginia prepare for war against Great Britain? I mean, just think about that. This was a question so dangerous that even suggesting yes was basically an act of treason. And into this supercharged atmosphere steps a lawyer, a guy known for his pretty fiery speeches, Patrick Henry. So Henry gets up and he starts with this simple but absolutely devastating question. He points to all the British warships in the harbors, the soldiers in the streets, and he asks, hey, who are these guys for? And the answer is just chilling. He says, they are meant for us. They can be meant for no other. Wow. In just one stroke, he completely reframes the whole situation. This isn't protection, he's saying. This is an occupation. Okay, so next he just dismantles any hope that things could be solved peacefully. He reminds everyone in the room that for 10 long years, they've pleaded, they've petitioned, they've argued with the king and parliament. And what did it get them? Nothing. The time for talk, he basically yells, is over. And then comes the line that would echo through American history forever. He lays out the choice in the starkest terms you can imagine. This isn't about taxes anymore or representation. No, it's about liberty versus slavery. And with those famous words, give me liberty or give me death, the debate is over. The spark of revolution is officially lit. All right, let's jump forward a year. The war is now underway. But the colonies need more than just inspiration. They need a formal, logical reason for their rebellion. They have to explain to the whole world exactly why they're doing this. And this huge, monumental task of writing this world-changing document, it falls to a pretty young delegate from Virginia, a guy named Thomas Jefferson. And get this, he's only 33 years old, and he has just over 2 weeks to write the text that would lay out the philosophical foundation for a brand new kind of nation. Now, this is where we get to the really revolutionary idea at the heart of the Declaration of Independence. Jefferson argues that our rights don't come from a king. They don't come from a government. They're natural, they're self-evident, and they're given to us by a creator. I mean, that single concept just completely flips centuries of belief in the divine right of kings on its head. And Jefferson, being a lawyer, structured this thing with incredible precision. It's like a legal argument. First, he lays out the principles, the self-evident truths. Then he presents his evidence, a long, long list of abuses by the king. And finally, he delivers the verdict. Independence is the only possible logical conclusion. And this part is so crucial. This wasn't just some abstract philosophical essay. No, Jefferson provided a super detailed list of specific complaints. This section was the proof, right? It was designed to show that King George III had broken his contract with the American people, which basically turned him from a legitimate ruler into a tyrant. Words don't just start revolutions. They also build the legends that come after. So now let's jump forward almost 100 years after the fact and see how a famous ride was turned into an immortal myth, not in a history book, but through the power of poetry. So the year is 1860. The United States is literally on the brink of civil war, and the poet Henry Wadsworth Longfellow writes these incredibly famous opening lines. Now, he wasn't just telling a history story. He was trying to remind a country that was falling apart of the shared courage that created it in the first place. And this comparison just brilliantly shows the difference between history and legend, right? Longfellow really simplifies the story. He focuses on a single hero. But the truth is, Revere wasn't alone, and he never actually made it to Concord. But see, Longfellow wasn't aiming for historical accuracy. He was crafting a symbol. And in the end, the poem was a huge success. I mean, it made Paul Revere a household name and turned his ride into this foundational story of American patriotism. He became the symbol of that one person willing to risk everything just to sound the alarm. But the words of the revolution weren't always so simple or straightforward. And that brings us to our most complex story, one that really reveals the deep and, honestly, painful contradiction at the very heart of this fight for liberty. And we're going to see it through the life of a truly remarkable writer. Her name was Phillis Wheatley. She was kidnapped from West Africa when she was just a little girl and sold into slavery in Boston. But, against all odds, she learned to read and write, not just English, but Latin and Greek too. She became a celebrated poet, and her very existence was a challenge to the deep-seated prejudices of her time. Now, I want you to just imagine this for a second. To get her book of poems published, Phillis Wheatley was literally forced to stand trial. And who was her jury? A panel of 18 of Boston's most powerful and educated men. Their job? To decide if an enslaved African woman was even capable of writing such incredible work. So this panel, which even included John Hancock, the guy who would later sign the Declaration of Independence, they interrogated her. They grilled her to see if she could possibly have this much literary genius. And you know what? She passed their test. But even with their seal of approval, no one in America would publish her book. It had to be published in London. Now, what's incredible is that despite her own enslavement, Wheatley became a powerful voice for the revolutionary cause. She even sent this poem to General George Washington himself, praising his leadership. And Washington was so impressed, he actually wrote back to thank her and invited her to meet him at his military headquarters. Phillis Wheatley did eventually gain her freedom. And her life, her powerful words, they force us to confront a really difficult truth, that the American Revolution was a fight for liberty in a land that was also practicing slavery. It's a contradiction that the new nation would struggle with for generations to come. So, from a fiery call to arms, to a rational blueprint for a nation, from a unifying myth to a challenging, complicated truth, this history shows us that words really do have the power to build and to break the world. And that leaves us with one last question to think about. What words being spoken today are going to define our future?